we like to wait and put things off and say, we'll do it tomorrow, another day, on down the line, I have time. But we don't know what that clock looks like. And so if I could share anything, it would be to prioritize this and think about it, sooner than later, because we don't know what happens tomorrow.
Welcome to Lessons in Legacy, the podcast by Santori Peters, where we explore the challenges and opportunities that come with building, growing, and preserving wealth across multiple generations. Join us as we uncover the essential lessons to protect and pass on your wealth for generations to come. So we are back here today for the second installment of the Santori Peters podcast, and I am fortunate to be joined here by Robyn Sechler. Robyn is the VP of Partnerships with Good Trust, but that's not where the story starts. And I thought that it would be important for Robyn to kind of share some of her story about where she got, or how she got to where she is today, and maybe there's some lessons along the way that our clients and listeners might want to hear. So, Robyn, why don't you tell us a little bit about Good Trust, what you do there, and kind of how you got to that point?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. First of all, thank you for inviting me today. I'm really excited to be here. You and I are very much aligned on helping families to protect their legacy in multiple ways. And you'll learn today that I am a storyteller, and a lot of what I have learned comes through the stories from my family and my own personal experiences. And If it's okay, I'm going to start with the story about my dad and sort of why I find any of this to be important.
Okay.
And, I lost my dad, it's about 15 years ago now.
Okay.
And when he was sick, I sat with him in his hospice room day after day. And we were fortunate that we had about 6 weeks of time to spend with him in those moments. But after a couple of days, I sort of ran out of things to talk about, and I was doing most of the talking at that time. And I realized one day that if I didn't take this opportunity to learn more about him, I wasn't going to get the chance again. Mm-hmm. And so I started asking him questions about his life, the usual stuff. How'd you meet mom? And why'd you become a teacher? And then he left teaching and opened a business. Why did we do? And sort of the surface level things. Yeah. And after a couple of days, I realized that I could take this a step further. Mm-hmm. And I started asking him about, who had the best room in your house, and what kept you up at night, and what did you and your brothers argue or fight over? Were your parents strict, or did they let you get away with things? And one of those days, my dad and I were talking about what it was like for him to go to school as a kid. Okay. And my husband came in and picked up my BlackBerry phone, which dates me a little bit, if you can imagine the BlackBerry phones. But he pressed the record button, set it down, and walked out of the room. Okay. My dad and I just kept chatting. We didn't know, what Tim had done. We just kept on with our conversation. Mm-hmm. The next day, my dad passed away. And with all that comes from losing somebody, my husband didn't realize the importance of what he had captured on that BlackBerry that day. And of course, I didn't know that it happened. So if we fast forward 8 years, my daughter, who was 2 at the time and, was born after my dad passed away, she found this BlackBerry from somewhere. I can't even tell you today where that came from. Yeah. And, in her 2-year-old voice, she's pushing buttons and saying, I play. And my husband walks in and says, literally, hold the phone. Yeah. You're going to have to take that from her. Yeah. Grab a tissue. Come in the other room. I have a story to tell you. And he shared with me about how he had recorded that story or captured that story between my dad and me. Mm-hmm. And I knew in that moment that I was going to have to do something to get that audio off of this little BlackBerry, that I didn't have the password and I didn't have a charger. And I won't bore you with all the steps it took for me to get that audio. But what I did was I pulled it up onto my computer alongside a picture of my dad. Mm-hmm. And for the first time, my kids were able to hear his voice. We have 3 kids. They were all born after he passed away. Mm-hmm. And what I expected was my kids to say, like, gosh, Mom, technology's come a long way. This is pretty lame. It's grainy and you can't really hear it and it's a little staticky. But I was wrong. What they did was they began asking more questions.
Okay.
And we call my dad Grandpa O, and they would say, what kind of ice cream did Grandpa O like? And would Grandpa O have come to my baseball games or played Legos with me? And so I realized in that moment that my family had not been good about securing the legacy or the memories or the stories of my dad.
Right.
And I don't think that many of us are good about doing it either.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point. It's like, how do you restore those memories? How do you store them? It's I think I shared with you on the phone. My dad's mom recently passed away in August, and I had heard you tell the story last February at a conference. And it was one of those things that, like, hey, I would love to do that with her. Mm-hmm. And my regret is that I did not get the chance to do that. Because she unfortunately passed, but I mean, she was a very important part of my life. Mm-hmm. And that's why I felt that it was important for us to share that today. But why do you think it's important for people to do that? Like, obviously, I have a strong feeling of somebody that I lost. Mm-hmm. But, what do you think is important about doing that?
Yeah, it's interesting because we can learn a lot from our family members and from past stories, similar to, before this conversation today, you and I were talking about all the things that you've learned from your dad, mm-hmm. right? And I've learned a lot from my dad as an entrepreneur as well. And if we think about all the things that our family members experienced from, love and loss and education and making decisions about which way they go in life and what is their career path and what are their political beliefs and their religion and all of these things that our family members have learned along the way. Mm-hmm. You can take what they've learned and apply it in your own world one way or another. And, we then have the opportunity to learn from the people around us in a very meaningful way.
I mean, do you think it's almost like, with recording these conversations or even capturing these memories that you're capturing their core values?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Whether that's intentional or not, I think that comes out in those types of conversations when you're having, personal conversations that are with the intention of learning more about that person, mm-hmm. you're going to begin to understand what their core values are.
Okay, so let's take a step back here for a second. So you have this recorded conversation from mm-hmm. Tim. Mm-hmm. How did you go from that to working with Good Trust? Maybe tell us a little bit about what it is that Good Trust does.
Yeah, sure. So the day that I found this recording, mm-hmm. and I shared it with my children, and I told you that I realized that we weren't very good about securing memories, and mm-hmm. I don't think others are either. And so by that evening, I had hung my own shingle. I had purchased the URL securingmemories.com, and I began helping families in a local capacity to preserve their family stories. Okay. We did that through, I had a video team. We would come to your home. We would stage your space, mm-hmm. lights, camera, action, the whole thing. We would conduct an interview, and the result would be a digital time capsule of sorts where we captured these memories, and then you could share them today mm-hmm. and future generations. So through that, I caught the attention of the founder of Good Trust. Okay. And Good Trust is a company where we provide online estate planning, wills, trust, powers of attorney, things like that to help protect your family. But we know that it's not only about protecting your stuff or mm-hmm. your money and your family. It's also about protecting these family stories and videos and photos and other online or digital assets that we have. Okay. And so, this is one of those other funny stories that I share with my kids today, and I will continue to. But I met the founder on Instagram, of all places, and just sort of, communicating back and forth. You're sort of doing this cool thing. He was building this online estate planning piece. And I was doing this cool thing, kind of building a digital vault for managing photos and videos. And we really realized that ultimately we could do this better together than apart. Okay. And so I credit him. He has a long technology background of working with global technology companies, including Google. He was a Google executive for most mm-hmm. of his career. And so I took this sort of leap of faith and I brought all of that, which I had built and grown with Securing Memories, and I married it with Good Trust, and that's where we are today. So really connecting those dots between I have this estate plan and I'm opening my family's eyes to all of the things that are important to me. And now this includes our photos and videos and family memories as well.
So what are the primary clients that like somebody like Good Trust work with? Is it business to consumer? Is it business to business? I mean, obviously, you know, there's some people who maybe want to work with an attorney. I mean, your husband, Tim, is an attorney, right? He's an estate planning attorney. So it's, you know, how do you separate the two, and what do you think? Like, who would be an ideal client for somebody like Good Trust?
Yeah. So my husband and I, you know, we have this family mission of helping families to get the things that matter into the hands of people who matter, right? Getting the important things to the important people. And so it's interesting for us because we get to do this in a variety of different ways. One of the ways, as you mentioned, is, you know, in a brick and mortar fashion where Tim runs our in-person estate planning practice. And certainly that is valuable, and people, you know, the people like to work with attorneys in some situations. We also know that there are individuals who would prefer not to work with an attorney, or maybe don't need that type of planning and would prefer something that they can sort of click, click, click to it from home. You
Not
know,
that like higher level of estate planning.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And so for our family, we get to provide estate planning in all the different ways, really reaching our family mission of getting the right things to the right people. And so, you know, with Good Trust, we provide it in a digital format. We do work direct to consumer. So, you know, you could go on to mygoodtrust.com and you could, you know, create your own will, trust, power of attorney, healthcare directive, etc. But we also work in a B2B fashion. So what that means is we work with insurance companies and financial advisors, employee benefits brokers, membership organizations, where we can deliver estate planning to more people at one given time. So it's more of the one-to-many instead of one-to-one, but both options are available.
So how has the technology changed over the years? I mean, you mentioned that you started this like 7-8 years ago, right? After, you know, your father passed 15 years ago. Like what have you seen in technology advancements that allow people to store these memories? I mean, I keep getting alerts on my iPhone saying you're out of storage, you're out of space. And that's a big deal for me and my wife because she's got, I think, you know, over 100 gigs worth of pictures and videos and things like that of our kids on her phone. So how has technology changed that allows people to do that?
You know, I mean, we have to take that even a step back, though, because you think about I'm sure you have boxes of photos somewhere, right? It's either a shoebox or an album that you put together, or maybe your wife or your parents even. And those live mostly in the basement in some box that like barely gets noticed, you know? And so today we have the ability to take some of those photos, and of course you can digitize them and bring them into a digital format. The interesting part about today versus back then is that you can have unlimited copies of these photos because it's a digital format. There's no incremental cost, right, for you to have 8 copies of a photo versus 1 before where it was, you know, in a photo album. The other thing I think is interesting is, you know, a lot of our smartphones allow you to search for specific things. And so that would have been harder to do before, even 8 years ago, you know, even on our smartphones then. The way that you can search for things and tag things and categorize them today is far more advanced. And I imagine that, you know, AI programs are going to come out that are going to allow us to do that in an even faster, better, more efficient way. And I think that's very exciting because, you know, nobody ever just takes one picture on their phone, right? They take 5 or 6 and say which one of these were the best.
And tend not to delete the ones that they don't like,
exactly.
Right?
And that's why we all run out of storage,
that's
right?
Because
we have 15 of the same photo. But, you know, I think programs are going to begin to identify that and be able to help you select, you know, this is the photo we should keep and then erase the others.
I think it's interesting to see that progression and kind of like where we are today versus where we were before, and the amount of storage that we can have on something like a cell phone. I think it's also interesting. I have two nieces who are a junior and freshman in college, and I want to say last year for Christmas, they actually asked for digital cameras instead of actually carrying it on their phone. So we're seeing this transition back to like some of the older technology, of maybe pulling away from the phone. So it's just interesting to see how that technology has changed. So
for sure.
I guess the question I want to ask is like, what do you think is important if a family wants to start preserving their stories, preserving their photos, preserving the videos? Like, how do they go about doing that?
Where do you start?
Yeah,
right?
Where do you start? Right.
This is like one of those things, have you ever been in, I don't know, the grocery store and you run into somebody who you haven't seen in 20 years and they say, "Hey, Ryan, what's new?" And you're like, "Oh, nothing."
Yeah.
You're like, "Really? 20 years, nothing new?"
Yeah.
And it's because the question is too big. Like so much has happened in 20 years that you can't easily come up with a quick answer for that. And so I think about preserving your memories in the same way, right? Bring it down to one theme or one topic or one family holiday or a specific tradition or a vacation that you took. It's really just starting with these little pieces. And over time, you build those memories that are preserved or secured or recorded. But trying to think about it all in one big, story is too much.
Yeah. So, I mean, you bring up a good point. It's like one of those things, like my wife loves to get family portraits done, of our family. And I'm always the one who's like, no, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. But she's also saying, we're never going to get that time back. You're never going to be in this moment again. So, like, what are your thoughts on scheduling out those sessions over time, or like those important milestones? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. And so here's an idea. Whenever you take those photos, flip it over and write your story on the back. Where are the kids? What are they into? What are their ages? Where's your business? What is your wife into? What vacation did you take this year? Because those are the things that you're going to want to remember and go back and look at or read or share or revisit.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I mean, you bring up a great point of like writing on the back. I mean, how have Christmas cards changed or holiday cards changed? Before it was just a handwritten note and a card. A lot of times now it's a picture of the family. And one of the things we do in our house is on our back window, heading out the back door of our house, it's actually a sliding glass door. We put them up. So our kids get to like walk through, oh, who is this? Who is this? Like, who are these people? So it's kind of a way to, share that story, share that lesson a little bit. So, like, how can families share the responsibility of passing down those memories? I know, like, my dad was always big on family vacations, and he would give us a thumb drive, right? And then that switched to, like, actually, no, before the thumb drive, it was a CD-ROM, with the memories on it. Now it's a thumb drive. It's like, what are ways that families can pass those images, videos, memories down to the next generation?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll answer that today, but I imagine if you ask me again in a year or 2 years, it's going to change because technology is changing and evolving so quickly. But if you think about, for example, my husband and I took my father-in-law's reels, like the video reels, the 8 millimeters, and converted those from a physical to a digital video. So now we can watch those at any time. It used to be that we couldn't watch that unless we were at my father-in-law's house, usually at Christmas, and we'd watch the reels, and it was great and super fun. But now, my kids who are of the technology generation and want to see things from their phones or their devices or whatever, can still experience those videos in the same way. Yeah. And that allows them to participate in that. So there are ways to take some of those older physical photos and bring them into, a more modern way to experience them. And I think getting kids involved at an earlier age in this whole experience, they have stories to tell too. And of course they can learn from grandpa and grandma and aunts and uncles and cousins and parents and whoever might be involved in sort of sharing some of these stories. But it would be interesting, I think, for them too to hear their perspective at the age of 8 and then again at 15 and then again as an adult. So
I know there's a local guy on one of the local TV stations, and he records his daughter every year for her birthday. And like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like,
I
how old
love
are you?
that.
What age? It's the name is escaping me right now, but he did that every year for his kids, and maybe that's one thing that people can do. So
Sure.
the other thing too is like, I know I recently did this. I took a bunch of old VHS tapes at my parents' house that were recordings of like football games or sporting events or, you know, like a wrestling match, or actually, come to think of it, I think that I have a video recording of interviewing my grandmother who passed away when my oldest was like 1, you know, so that's what you're talking about, taking those old memories and digitizing them. Either putting it into a DVD or some kind of digital format so we can have it on our phones.
Yeah,
So,
and then they last longer as well.
Yeah.
That way. You know, the other thing that I think is interesting to think about today is that we can set messages to arrive later, right? And so I can create a message today. Imagine leaving a video today for your great-great-granddaughter's wedding day that says something like, I wish I could be there with you today. I'm so proud of you. You know, you've come a long way. I wish you all the best on your new marriage with your spouse. And being able to receive that as that great-great-granddaughter on her wedding day would be such an incredible gift. And so, you know, technology allows us today to do things that we would have never imagined. And I think that will be true as time goes on.
Yeah, and I think as time goes on, it's going to continually change, continually evolve.
For sure.
So let me ask you this question: what is a favorite memory that you've preserved, and why is that important to you?
So, you know, there are lots of reasons why I believe that this is important, but this is the story of my grandmother. My grandmother, she passed away at the age of 98 a couple of years ago, and she shared this story with me. She has like the world's greatest love story of anybody I've ever heard in my entire life. And her story goes like this. She met Rex when she was in high school. And Mimi and Rex, we call my grandmother Mimi, Mimi and Rex dated, you know, all through high school. And then, of course, Rex went off to the war, and Mimi, you know, lived her life. She went on, and they sort of split ways, and they didn't really reconnect again after that. But all through high school, they went dancing. That was what they did every Friday night. You know, that was their thing together. And she, you know, she got married and had kids of her own, and he got married and had kids of his own. They didn't know that they only lived about 5 miles apart from each other all this time. But when she was 86, he called her and said, hey, you know, just, are you still around, sort of thing. And he said, you know, I would like to take you dancing. And so he went and he drove to her house and he picked her up, and she had been divorced for about 40 years. He had been widowed for quite a long time. And so, you know, they were both in this sort of second stage of life, and they reconnected, and he took her dancing, and then he took her dancing the next night, and then the next night, and the next night. And then at the age of 87, she got married for the second time in her life. And I love this. And one of the most special things about that is that my grandmother and I were brides at the same time. And we got married a couple of months apart from one another. So that was a really cool and fun experience for me. Yeah. And I wanted to capture her telling that story. I mean, you don't know my grandmother, but she is full of energy and very vibrant. And when she tells a story, people listen. And so I went to her home and I, you know, staged her lights, camera, action, the whole thing. And I said, you know, okay, Mimi, let's hear it. We are here to capture your love story on video. Let's do it. And she had a little bit of a hard time getting started. Okay. And she's like, okay, love story. She's kind of looking at Rex like, with this guy, right? You know, and he could tell that she was having a hard time getting started. And so he was prompting her, come on, you remember, you know, we used to go dancing in high school. She's like, dancing in high school. And so after a few tries, he realized, and I realized, that she wasn't going to be able to get the story out. And so he told it for her. And that's the recording I have today. And when we finished that recording, I realized that I had been too late in having the opportunity for her to share her own love story. And when the story ended, she looked to him and she said, that's a really beautiful love story. Whose is it? And I knew that we had missed our chance. And so that is one of the things that I find so important is we like to wait and put things off and say, we'll do it tomorrow, another day, on down the line. I have time. But we don't know what that clock looks like. And so if I could share anything, it would be to prioritize this and think about it, sooner than later, because we don't know what happens tomorrow.
Right. Time is that one piece of the puzzle that we don't know how much we have. It's that ever elusive piece. So I think if we learned anything here today, it's don't wait. You don't need a big production company. It's as simple as picking up an iPhone.
Absolutely.
Pushing record on the old BlackBerry.
Exactly.
Right? It's to be able to tell our story and ask the questions. And, I think that there's a lot of things we can do, but it's about preserving the memories and making sure that we can pass those on to the next generation. Because, here at our firm, we talk about legacy, right? And we like to say, if you don't define it, right? If you don't define your own legacy, somebody else is going to define it for you. So, Robyn, thank you very much for joining us today. I think there's a lot of things our listeners will love and enjoy about this, especially sharing the stories of Mimi and Rex and the story of you and your dad. And I guess, from my standpoint, I'm thankful for Tim having the foresight to go and push record on that BlackBerry, because it brought you to where you are today. And I think you're doing a lot of great things.
Yeah, absolutely. You and me both. That little pressing that play or record button, changed the direction of our world. And so I appreciate what you're doing. I find, obviously, I believe this is very important, and you're doing great work to help people preserve their legacy in a very meaningful way. So,
all right. Thank you.
Thank you.